The silence had wrapped around Beatrice Jordan like a heavy winter coat she could not remove, even when the sun blazed overhead and turned the prairie grass golden brown outside Fort Garland, Colorado. She stood at the window of the small mercantile she had inherited from her father 2 years prior, watching dust devils dance across the main street, and realized she could not remember the last time she had spoken more than 10 words in a single day. The loneliness had crept in so gradually after her father's death that she had not noticed when it became her constant companion, as familiar as the wooden floorboards beneath her feet or the smell of dried tobacco and coffee beans that permeated every corner of the store. It was the spring of 1878, and Fort Garland sat in the San Luis Valley like a collection of weathered wooden blocks scattered by a careless hand. The Rocky Mountains rose to the west, their peaks still wearing caps of snow even as May warmed the valley floor. Beatrice was 23 years old, unmarried, and had become as much a fixture of the town as the mercantile itself. People came in, made their purchases, and left without really seeing her anymore. She was simply the woman behind the counter, the one who kept the ledgers and ordered supplies from Denver and knew where everything was kept on the crowded shelves. She had not always been this way. As a girl, she had been quick to laugh, eager to help her father with customers, full of questions about the world beyond the valley. But her mother had died when she was 15, and then her father had followed 6 years later, his heart simply giving out one morning as he lifted a barrel of flour. The lawyer had read the will. The mercantile became hers, and she had continued opening the doors each morning because she did not know what else to do. Her friends from school had all married and moved away or become absorbed in their own families. The women in town were polite but distant, perhaps unsure how to approach someone who seemed so self-contained, so separate from the normal flow of life. Beatrice did not realize how deep her isolation had become until it felt normal, like the constant ache of an old injury you learn to work around. She ate her meals alone in the small room behind the store where she also slept. She read books by lamplight until her eyes grew heavy. She kept the mercantile spotless and well-stocked, and she spoke to almost no one beyond what was necessary for commerce. The bell above the door chimed, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned from the window and arranged her face into the pleasant, neutral expression she wore during business hours. A cowboy stood in the doorway, and for a moment the afternoon sun behind him turned him into a dark silhouette. Then he stepped inside and removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair that needed cutting and a face that had seen considerable weather and not a small amount of hardship. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice carrying the roughness of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. "I am looking for work supplies, rope, leather oil, and if you have them, a good pair of work gloves. Mine have gone through one too many fences." Beatrice nodded and moved behind the counter. "The rope is along that wall, 3 different weights. The leather oil is here." She reached under the counter and produced a tin. "And I have work gloves in various sizes in this drawer." The cowboy approached, his boots making solid sounds on the wooden floor. He was tall, probably close to 30 years old, with gray eyes that seemed to notice everything. When he reached the counter, he did not immediately look at the gloves. Instead, he looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "I am Everett Grant," he said, extending his hand. "I just hired on at the Meadowbrook Ranch north of town. Came down from Wyoming about a week ago." Beatrice hesitated for the briefest moment before taking his hand. His grip was firm but not crushing, his palm calloused from years of hard work. "Beatrice Jordan, I own this mercantile." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Jordan." He released her hand and smiled, and the smile seemed genuine, reaching his eyes. "The foreman told me this was the best place in town for supplies. Said if Beatrice does not have it, you do not need it." "I try to keep things well stocked," she said, pulling out the drawer of gloves. "What size do you need?" They conducted the transaction with efficiency. Everett selected what he needed, testing the rope for strength and examining the gloves carefully before making his choice. As Beatrice tallied up the cost in her ledger, He leaned against the counter in a relaxed manner that suggested he was in no hurry to leave. "How long have you been running this place?" he asked. 2 years. It was my father's before that." "That is a lot of responsibility for someone on their own." Beatrice looked up from the ledger, a flicker of something defensive moving through her. "I manage well enough." "I did not mean to suggest otherwise," Everett said quickly. "I just meant it must keep you busy. Running a business like this takes considerable skill and dedication." She softened slightly, recognizing that he had not meant offense. "It does keep me occupied. That will be $3.40. Everett counted out the money and placed it on the counter. As he gathered his purchases, he said, "I imagine I will be back before too long. Ranch work has a way of wearing through supplies faster than you can replace them." "I am open every day except Sunday." "Good to know." He settled his hat back on his head and touched the brim in a small gesture of farewell. "Thank you kindly, Miss Jordan." After he left, Beatrice stood behind the counter for a long moment, aware of a strange feeling she could not immediately identify. It took her several minutes to realize it was simply the mild warmth of having had an actual conversation, brief as it was, that went beyond the bare minimum required for commerce. The recognition of how starved she was for even that small connection made something twist uncomfortably in her chest. The days passed in their usual rhythm. Beatrice opened the mercantile each morning, swept the floors, dusted the shelves, and waited for customers. She sold flour and sugar to the Mexican farmers who worked the land around Fort Garland. She sold ammunition to hunters and tobacco to the soldiers who still occasionally passed through, though the fort itself had been abandoned as a military post the year before. She sold fabric and thread to the wives who came in with their children, and she watched those families with a kind of distant curiosity, as though observing a life she could not quite imagine for herself. Everett Grant came back to the mercantile 5 days after his first visit. This time, he needed nails and a new hammer, his old one having cracked at the handle. Beatrice showed him what she had, and again they fell into conversation that extended slightly beyond the purely transactional. "How are you finding the Meadowbrook Ranch?" she asked, as she wrapped the nails in brown paper. "It is good, honest work. The foreman is fair, and the other hands seem like decent men. The land here is different from Wyoming, more open, bigger sky somehow, with those mountains standing watch." "Have you worked ranches long?" "Since I was 16. Started in Texas, worked my way north over the years. I like moving around, seeing different country. Though I suppose at some point a man has to think about settling in one place." He said this last part thoughtfully, as though he was still working out what he felt about it. Beatrice found herself curious despite her usual reserve. "What made you leave Wyoming?" Everett was quiet for a moment, and she thought perhaps she had overstepped. Then he said, "The ranch I was working closed down. Owner died. His children had no interest in keeping it going. Seemed like as good a time as any to see what Colorado had to offer." "Well, the valley has need of good ranch hands. The work is steady if you're willing to work hard." "That has never been a problem for me." He paid for his purchases and then said, "Would you mind if I asked you something, Miss Jordan?" She looked at him warily. "What is it?" "Do you ever take time away from the mercantile? For yourself, I mean?" The question caught her off guard. "I close on Sundays." "And what do you do on Sundays?" Beatrice realized she did not have a good answer. She cleaned her living quarters. She did her personal laundry. She read. She existed in the same small space, just without customers. "I manage the household tasks that need doing." Everett looked at her with something that might have been concern or might have been simple curiosity. "That does not sound like much of a rest." "It is sufficient," she said a little more sharply than she intended. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I am sorry. I have a tendency to speak out of turn. My mother always said I asked too many questions." Despite herself, Beatrice felt her irritation fade. "It is all right. I'm not used to people taking an interest in how I spend my time." "Well, maybe they should," Everett said. Then, as if realizing how that sounded, he gathered his purchases quickly. "Thank you again for your help, Miss Jordan. I will likely see you again soon." After he left, Beatrice stood behind the counter and tried to return to her usual state of mind, the quiet blankness that made the hours pass more easily, but she found it difficult. And his questions had stirred something in her, made her look at her life from a different angle. When had she stopped being a person and become merely the keeper of a store? When had loneliness become so normal that she no longer even recognized it as loneliness, but simply as the way life was? That night, lying in her narrow bed, she found herself thinking about Everett Grant. Not in any romantic sense, she told herself, but simply as a puzzle. He was new to town, knew no one, and yet he seemed comfortable in his own skin in a way she envied. He asked questions. He looked directly at people when he spoke to them. He seemed genuinely interested in the answers. Over the following weeks, Everett became a regular presence at the mercantile. He always needed something: wire cutters, leather straps, a new canteen, coffee beans, dried beef for the long days out on the range. Beatrice began to recognize the sound of his particular footsteps on the porch before the bell chimed. She found herself taking a bit more care with her appearance on the days she thought he might come in, pinning her dark hair more carefully, making sure her dress was pressed. Their conversations grew longer and more personal. He told her about growing up in Texas, the youngest of 4 brothers, all of whom had scattered to different territories after their parents died. She told him about her father, how he had loved the mercantile, how he had known every customer by name and had extended credit to families going through hard times, sometimes to his own detriment. "He sounds like he was a good man," Everett said. "He was. After my mother died, he was all I had. And then he was gone too, and I had the mercantile. It felt like that was what I was supposed to do, keep it going, honor his memory." "But what do you want, Beatrice?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his voice sent a small shock through her. "I do not know anymore," she admitted. "I'm not sure I ever really thought about it." "Then maybe it is time to start." She looked at him. This man who had appeared in her life like a character stepping out of a book she had been reading. "What about you? What do you want?" Everett leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful. "For a long time, I wanted to keep moving, see what was over the next hill. But lately, I have been thinking maybe what I want is to stop running, to find a place and a reason to stay." The air between them felt charged with unspoken possibilities. Beatrice broke eye contact first, suddenly flustered in a way she had not been since she was a girl. "That will be 60 cents for the coffee beans." He paid without comment, but as he was leaving, he turned back. "Beatrice, would you consider taking a walk with me on Sunday afternoon, just around town, nothing improper? I would like to spend more time talking with you outside the mercantile." Her first instinct was to refuse. She could list a dozen reasons why it was not appropriate, why she was too busy, why she could not spare the time. But then she thought about the loneliness she had not even recognized until he started showing her what it felt like to connect with another person again. "All right," she said, "Sunday afternoon." The smile that spread across his face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I will come by at 2:00. After he left, Beatrice sat down on the stool behind the counter, her heart beating faster than it had any right to. She felt frightened and excited in equal measure. Part of her wanted to take back her agreement, to retreat into the safe isolation she had built around herself. But another part, a part she had thought long dead, wanted to see what might happen if she let someone in. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a pleasant warmth that hinted at the summer to come. Beatrice changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple blue cotton that had been her mother's. She brushed her hair until it shone and pinned it up in a style less severe than her usual working arrangement. When Everett knocked on the door at exactly 2:00, she took a deep breath and opened it. He had cleaned up as well, his hair freshly washed and combed, his shirt pressed. He held his hat in his hands and looked almost nervous. "You look lovely, Beatrice." "Thank you. You look quite presentable yourself." They walked slowly down the main street, past the closed shops and the church where services had concluded hours earlier. A few people were out enjoying the afternoon, and Beatrice was aware of curious glances. She knew that by tomorrow there would be talk about her walking with the new cowboy from Meadowbrook Ranch. The thought made her uncomfortable, but also a little defiant. Let them talk. She was a grown woman who had managed alone for 2 years. She could certainly take a walk with a man if she chose. "Tell me about Wyoming," she said as they turned onto a side street that led toward the edge of town. Everett talked easily about the high plains, the harsh winters, the cattle drives and roundups. He had a gift for description that brought the scenes to life. In turn, she found herself telling him about her childhood, about learning arithmetic by helping her father with the ledgers, about her mother's herb garden behind the mercantile that had gone wild after her death. "Do you still have the garden?" Everett asked. "In a manner of speaking, it is overgrown now. I have not had time to tend it properly." "I could help you with that if you like. I am handy with growing things. My mother had a garden in Texas. She taught all of us boys how to plant and weed and harvest." "You would do that?" "I would like to, if you would let me." They had reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. The mountains rose in the distance, massive and eternal. Beatrice realized she was happy. It was a strange, almost forgotten sensation, but unmistakable. She was happy to be walking beside this man, happy to be talking and being heard, happy to be outside on a beautiful afternoon instead of alone in her room. "I should tell you something," Everett said, stopping and turning to face her. "I have been to town 3 times more than I actually needed supplies. I kept finding excuses to come to the mercantile because I wanted to see you." Beatrice felt her cheeks grow warm. "I suspected as much when you came in for the 3rd tin of leather oil in 2 weeks. He laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "I am not very subtle, am I?" "Not particularly, but I did not mind." "Good, because I would like to keep seeing you, Beatrice, properly, I mean. Courting, if you would be amenable to that." Her heart was racing again. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, but the cautious part, the part that had learned to protect itself through isolation, made her hesitate. "I am not sure I know how to do this anymore, Everett. It has been a long time since I let anyone close to me." "We can figure it out together," he said gently. "We can go as slowly as you need. I'm not going anywhere." She looked up at him, at his weathered face and kind eyes, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and right. "Yes, I would like that." The next several weeks unfolded like a new chapter in Beatrice's life. Everett came to town every Sunday, and they spent the afternoons together. He helped her clear out the overgrown herb garden, turning the soil and building new beds while she sorted through the tangle of plants, identifying what could be saved and what needed to be pulled. Working side by side in the warm sun, their hands dirty and their conversation easy, Beatrice felt something within her begin to thaw. He told her about his dreams of someday having his own small ranch. Nothing grand, just enough land for a modest herd and a good house. She confessed that she sometimes felt trapped by the mercantile, that she loved and resented it in equal measure because it was both her livelihood and her prison. "You could hire someone to help," Everett suggested one afternoon as they sat on the back step, sharing water from a dipper. "Give yourself some freedom." "I have thought about it, but I would have to trust someone completely to handle the money and the inventory." "What about your father's old assistant? I heard someone mention in town that he had a young man who worked for him years ago." "Thomas Brennan. He moved to Denver for better opportunities. I do not think he would come back." "Have you asked?" Beatrice realized she had not. She had simply assumed the mercantile was hers alone to manage because that was how it had been for 2 years, but Everett was right. She did not have to carry everything by herself if she did not want to. The following week, she wrote a letter to Thomas in Denver. To her surprise, he responded within 10 days. The opportunities in the city had not panned out as he hoped, and he missed the valley. He would be happy to come back and work at the mercantile, splitting the duties and the profits in whatever arrangement she thought fair. When the letter arrived, Beatrice read it twice, then walked straight to the Meadowbrook Ranch to find Everett. One of the other hands directed her to the north pasture where he was mending fence. She rode out on the horse she kept stabled behind the mercantile, a gentle mare named Daisy that she rarely used because she rarely went anywhere. Everett looked up in surprise as she approached. "Beatrice, is everything all right?" She dismounted and walked to him, holding out the letter. Thomas said yes. He will come back and help run the mercantile. Everett read the letter, a smile growing on his face. "That is wonderful news. It is because of you. You made me see that I had choices I was not even considering." He set down the wire cutters he had been using and took her hands in his. "You are the one who wrote the letter. You are the one making the choice to change your life. But you showed me it was possible. Before you came, I was so lonely I did not even know I was lonely anymore. It had just become normal, the way things were. And now—" She trailed off, suddenly emotional. "And now?" he prompted gently. "Now I remember what it feels like to be alive, to look forward to something, to care about someone." Everett pulled her closer, and she went willingly into his embrace. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the middle of the open range, with the mountains watching over them. "I am falling in love with you, Beatrice," he said quietly. "I think I started falling the first day I walked into your mercantile and saw you standing at that window looking so alone. I wanted to be the one who made that loneliness go away." She pulled back just enough to look up at him. "I am falling in love with you too. It frightens me how much I feel for you." "Do not be frightened. I'm not going anywhere, I promise you that." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, and Beatrice felt the last of her careful walls crumble away. She had spent 2 years protecting herself from feeling anything too deeply, and now she was feeling everything all at once, and it was overwhelming and wonderful. Thomas Brennan arrived in Fort Garland in early July. He was older than Beatrice remembered, probably close to 40 now, but he had the same ready smile and quick mind for figures. They worked out an arrangement where he would manage the mercantile 4 days a week, giving Beatrice time to pursue other interests and simply have a life beyond the store. The relief she felt at sharing the burden was immense. With her newfound freedom, Beatrice discovered parts of herself she had forgotten existed. She rode Daisy out into the valley, exploring the land she had lived in all her life but rarely truly seen. She visited with the Mexican families on their farms, learning about their crops and traditions, making friends instead of just being the distant mercantile owner. She attended church socials and actually stayed to talk afterward instead of hurrying back to her empty room. And she spent time with Everett. Long, unhurried time. They had picnics by the creek that ran through the valley. They attended a dance in town where he held her close and she felt like she was floating. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories, quirks, fears, and hopes. One evening in late August, as they sat in the restored herb garden watching the sun set behind the mountains, Everett said, "I have been saving my wages. The foreman at Meadowbrook mentioned there is a small property coming available east of town, just 50 acres, but it has a creek running through it and decent grazing. I am thinking of making an offer." Beatrice's heart leaped. "That is wonderful, Everett, your own land." "It would be a start. I could run some cattle, build a house, make something of my own instead of always working for someone else." He paused, then turned to face her fully. "But I need to know something first. I need to know if you see a future with me, Beatrice, because that would change what kind of house I build and how I plan things." She knew what he was really asking. "Are you proposing to me?" "I am trying to work up to it in a proper way, but I suppose I'm not doing a very good job." He took her hand, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. "I love you. I want to marry you and build a life with you. I know it has only been a few months, but I've never been more certain of anything. You make me want to stop wandering and start building. Will you marry me?" Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, deep and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were laughing with the sheer joy of it. They were married in September, in the small church in Fort Garland with what felt like the entire town in attendance. Beatrice wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her. Everett wore a new suit he had ordered from Denver, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothing. Thomas Brennan stood as witness, beaming with pride as though he had orchestrated the whole thing himself. The reception was held at the Mercantile, which they had cleared out and decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. People brought food and well wishes. The Mexican farmers brought a guitar and taught everyone dances that had them all laughing and breathless. Even the usually reserved wives from town let themselves relax and celebrate. As Beatrice danced with her new husband, she marveled at how much her life had changed in just 6 months. She had gone from a woman who barely spoke to anyone, who thought loneliness was just her natural state, to someone surrounded by friends and married to a man she loved deeply. It seemed almost impossible. "What are you thinking?" Everett asked, pulling her closer as the music slowed. "That I am happier than I ever thought I could be. That I did not know life could feel like this." "This is just the beginning," he promised. "We have so much ahead of us." They spent their wedding night in the room behind the Mercantile, which felt strange and wonderful at the same time. In the morning, they would begin moving Beatrice's belongings to the small house on Everett's new property. He had spent every spare moment over the past month working on it, turning the existing cabin into something livable while planning additions for the future. The property was modest but beautiful, with the creek Everett had mentioned running along the southern edge and good grassland rising gently toward the foothills. The cabin had 2 rooms when they moved in, a main living area with a kitchen and a bedroom, but Everett had already framed out additions. "Eventually we will have a proper parlor," he said as they unpacked Beatrice's few possessions, "and more bedrooms for children, if we are blessed with them." Beatrice felt a flutter of nervousness and anticipation at the mention of children. She had not let herself think much about that possibility during her lonely years. Now it seemed not only possible but desirable. "I would like that." "You would make a wonderful mother. I have seen how patient you are with the children who come into the Mercantile." "I hope so. I want our children to grow up feeling loved and secure, never lonely the way I was." Everett set down the box he was holding and came to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "They will be loved beyond measure. I promise you that." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Beatrice continued to work at the Mercantile 3 days a week, enjoying the work more now that it was a choice rather than an obligation. The other days she spent at the ranch, as they had begun to call their small property. She learned to help Everett with the cattle he had purchased, 12 head to start, and discovered she enjoyed the physical work of ranching. She also threw herself into making their house a home. She planted a garden even larger than the one behind the Mercantile, growing vegetables and herbs and flowers. She sewed curtains for the windows and a quilt for their bed. She cooked meals that they ate together at the table Everett had built, talking about their days and making plans for the future. In November, Beatrice realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She waited another few weeks to be certain, then told Everett one evening as they sat by the fire, "I think I am with child." He looked at her with wonder and joy spreading across his face. "Truly?" "I am fairly certain. All the signs are there." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were made of glass. "A baby. Our baby. Beatrice, I cannot believe it." "Are you happy?" "Happy? I am thrilled, overwhelmed, terrified, all of it at once." He pulled back to look at her. "How are you feeling? Are you all right?" "I feel wonderful, actually. A little tired, perhaps, but wonderful." Over the winter months, as Beatrice's belly grew round with their child, they continued to work on expanding the house. Everett insisted on doing the heavy work himself, not wanting Beatrice to strain herself. By the time spring arrived, they had added 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor, just as he had promised. Beatrice spent those months sewing baby clothes and blankets, her heart full in a way she had never experienced. She thought often about her younger self, the lonely woman who had stood at the Mercantile window day after day, barely speaking to anyone. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from a distant past. In her place was someone who knew how to laugh, how to love, how to look forward to the future with hope, instead of just enduring one day after another. In May of 1879, just over a year after Everett had first walked into her mercantile, Beatrice gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, but when the midwife finally placed the squalling baby in her arms, Beatrice felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "He is perfect," Everett said, looking at his son with tears streaming down his face. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. They had discussed several options over the months, but none had felt quite right. Now, looking at their son's small, serious face, Everett said, "What about Samuel? After your father. Samuel Jordan Grant." Beatrice felt her own tears start to fall. My father would have loved that." "Yes, Samuel." Little Samuel was a healthy, strong baby with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. He demanded attention frequently and loudly, and Beatrice and Everett fell into the exhausting, wonderful routine of new parents. They took turns walking him when he fussed at night. They marveled over every tiny change, every new expression. Thomas proved to be a godsend during those early months, managing the mercantile almost entirely on his own and insisting that Beatrice take all the time she needed. "That baby is more important than selling flour and nails," he said firmly when she suggested coming back to work earlier than planned. "We will manage just fine." As Samuel grew from a newborn into a curious, active baby, life on the small ranch found its rhythm. Everett expanded their herd gradually, never overextending their resources, but steadily building toward his dream of a truly successful operation. Beatrice tended her garden and raised their son, and discovered that she had a talent for making cheese from their cow's milk, which she began selling at the mercantile. One evening when Samuel was about 8 months old, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold, Everett said, "Do you remember what you said to me once? About your loneliness being so deep it felt normal?" Beatrice shifted Samuel in her lap, the baby making happy gurgling sounds as he played with her fingers. "I remember. It feels like a lifetime ago." "It was not even 2 years ago. Look at how much has changed." "You changed everything," she said softly. "You saw me when I had made myself invisible. You cared enough to keep coming back, to ask questions, to make me see that I deserved more than just existing." "We changed everything," Everett corrected. "You were brave enough to let me in. You were brave enough to choose something different." "Normal does not include company anymore," Beatrice said with a small smile. "Now normal is you and Samuel and this life we are building. That is what normal means to me now." Everett reached over and took her hand, his thumb rubbing gently across her knuckles. "I love you, Beatrice Grant. More every day. I love you too, so very much." As the months and years passed, their small ranch continued to grow and prosper. They added more cattle, built a proper barn, and expanded the house once more when Beatrice became pregnant with their second child. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1881, a tiny, fierce little thing they named Margaret Rose, after both their mothers. Samuel, now a rambunctious 2-year-old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to help with everything, bringing her blankets and toys, singing to her in his off-key toddler voice. Watching them together, Beatrice felt a contentment so deep it sometimes brought her to tears. The mercantile continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and Beatrice eventually made him a full partner in the business. It seemed only fair, as he was doing most of the day-to-day work. She still helped out occasionally, particularly during busy times, but her focus had shifted to her family and the ranch. Everett proved to be an exceptional father, patient and playful with the children. He taught Samuel to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, setting him on a gentle old mare and leading her around the property. He carved toys and told stories and never seemed to tire of their endless questions. One Sunday afternoon in the summer of 1882, the whole family went on a picnic to their favorite spot by the creek. Samuel, now 3 1/2, chased butterflies through the grass while baby Margaret slept in a basket in the shade. Beatrice and Everett sat together on a blanket, watching their son and listening to the peaceful sounds of the water flowing over rocks. "I have been thinking," Everett said, "about expanding the herd again, maybe doubling what we have now. We have the grazing land for it, and the prices for beef are good. That sounds wise. We have done well building slowly and carefully. We have done better than I ever dared hope, Everett said. Sometimes I think about that first day I walked into your mercantile. I almost did not go in. I had passed it twice already, trying to work up the courage. Beatrice looked at him in surprise. I did not know that. You seemed so confident. I felt anything but confident. I had seen you through the window and I thought you were beautiful, and I made up an excuse about needing supplies just so I could meet you. Then I kept making up excuses to come back. The leather oil, Beatrice said with a laugh. I knew no one needed that much leather oil. I am not a subtle man. He pulled her closer. But I am a persistent one, and I am so grateful you gave me a chance. I am grateful you saw me, really saw me when I had forgotten how to let people see me at all. Samuel came running over then, demanding that his father help him build a dam in the creek. Everett stood with a mock groan. Duty calls. Come on, son, let us see what we can build. Beatrice watched her husband and son splash in the shallow water, their laughter carrying across the meadow. Margaret stirred in her basket and Beatrice lifted her daughter, holding her close and breathing in that sweet baby smell. This life, so full of love and noise and connection, was more than she had ever imagined possible during those lonely years. The seasons continued their cycle. Winters in the valley were harsh, with snow piling high and temperatures dropping well below zero. But the house Everett had built was snug and warm, and there was something wonderful about those long winter evenings when they were all together inside, the children playing on the floor while Beatrice sewed and Everett carved or mended tack. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch work and followed his father everywhere. Margaret proved to be bold and adventurous, climbing everything she could reach and keeping her parents constantly on their toes. In the spring of 1884, Beatrice gave birth to their third child, another son they named Henry William. With 3 small children and a growing ranch, life was busier than ever. There were days when Beatrice felt exhausted down to her bones. But even on the hardest days, she never felt the old loneliness. She was surrounded by people who loved her and whom she loved in return. Her life had purpose and meaning beyond just surviving. One evening in the fall of 1885, after they had finally gotten all 3 children to bed, Beatrice and Everett collapsed onto the sofa in their parlor. The house was quiet for the first time all day. The only sounds the crackle of the fire and the distant lowing of cattle. I am getting too old for this, Everett said with a tired laugh. He was 37 now, his sandy hair showing threads of gray at the temples. You are not old, Beatrice said, leaning against him, just well seasoned. That is a kind way of putting it. He wrapped his arm around her. 3 children, a successful ranch, a thriving business in town. Who would have thought, when I was drifting from place to place, that I would end up here with all of this? Do you ever regret settling down? Do you ever miss the wandering life? Not even for a moment. You and the children are everything I never knew I needed. This life, this place, this is where I was meant to be all along. I just had to find my way here. I am glad you did. I do not like to think about what would have become of me if you had not walked into the mercantile that day. You would have figured it out eventually. You are stronger than you give yourself credit for. Maybe. But I'm glad I did not have to figure it out alone. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, simply enjoying the peace and each other's presence. Then Everett said, I saw Thomas in town yesterday. He mentioned he's thinking about getting married. There is a widow who moved to Fort Garland a few months ago. Apparently they have been courting. Mrs. Patterson? I had wondered about that. I have seen them at church together. I am happy for him. He deserves someone to share his life with. He said you inspired him. Seeing how happy you are made him realize he wanted that too. Beatrice felt a warm glow at the thought that her happiness could inspire others. There had been a time when she thought happiness was not meant for her, when she believed loneliness was simply her lot in life. How wrong she had been. As the years continued to pass, the Grant family became a fixture in the Fort Garland community. Samuel grew into a responsible young man who took over more and more of the ranch work. Margaret, spirited and determined, shocked everyone by deciding she wanted to be a teacher and working hard at her studies. Young Henry showed a talent for working with horses that impressed even the most experienced ranchers in the valley. Everett and Beatrice grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They knew each other's rhythms and moods so well that they often did not need words to communicate. They had weathered hard times together, including a terrible winter that killed part of their herd and a summer drought that threatened their crops. But they had also celebrated countless good times watching their children grow, seeing the ranch prosper, building a life that felt solid and real. In the summer of 1892, they threw a party to celebrate their 14th wedding anniversary. Friends and neighbors came from all over the valley. There was music and dancing, tables laden with food, children running wild in the twilight. As Beatrice looked around at all the people who had become part of her life, she was struck by how full her world had become. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Everett found her standing outside, looking up at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Everything. All of this. I was remembering that woman I used to be standing at the mercantile window day after day, so lonely she did not even recognize her own loneliness anymore. And now look at all of this. Look at what we have built." "You are not that woman anymore. You have not been her for a very long time." "No, I am not, but I remember her. And I am grateful to her for being brave enough to say yes when you asked to court her, for being brave enough to choose something different." Everett took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers in a gesture so familiar it felt like coming home. "I am grateful too, for her bravery and for everything that came after. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice Grant. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You made normal include company. You made my life full of love and connection and purpose. You saved me from a loneliness so deep I thought it was just the way life was supposed to be." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close under the vast Colorado sky. "We saved each other. That is what love does." As they stood there together, Beatrice thought about all the years they had ahead of them. Samuel would likely marry soon and perhaps start his own ranch nearby. Margaret would finish her education and become the teacher she dreamed of being. Henry would continue to work with horses, maybe even start a breeding program. There would be grandchildren eventually, more joy and challenges and surprises, but through it all she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never be lonely again. She had learned that loneliness was not something to be endured or accepted as normal. Connection, love, and companionship were what made life worth living. And she had found all of that and more with Everett. The years continued to unfold gently. Samuel did marry to a kind young woman named Elizabeth from one of the neighboring ranches. They built a house on the far edge of the Grant property and started their own family. Margaret completed her education and became the teacher at the Fort Garland schoolhouse, beloved by her students for her energy and patience. Henry started a small horse breeding operation that quickly gained a reputation throughout the valley for producing quality animals. Beatrice and Everett became grandparents multiple times over, their house often filled with the laughter and chaos of visiting grandchildren. They continued to work the ranch together, though they gradually turned over more responsibilities to their children. There was something peaceful about this stage of life, watching the next generation take the reins while still being present and helpful when needed. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, they took a rare trip alone together, traveling to Denver for a week. It was the farthest Beatrice had been from Fort Garland since she was a child. The city was exciting but overwhelming, and both of them were happy to return to the quiet of the valley. "I think I have had enough adventure to last me a good while," Everett said as their wagon rolled back onto their property. "Agreed, although it was nice to spend time just the two of us. We should do it more often. Make time for just us, the way we used to. And they did. They instituted a weekly tradition of taking a ride together every Sunday afternoon, just the two of them, revisiting the places that had been important in their courtship. The creek where they had picnicked, the spot where he had proposed, the herb garden behind what was now Thomas's mercantile, which he maintained lovingly in memory of Beatrice's mother. In the spring of 1903, as they celebrated Everett's 55th birthday, Beatrice watched him playing with their youngest grandchild, a toddler named Sarah, and marveled at how blessed their life had been. They had built something real and lasting, not just in terms of the ranch and their material success, but in the family and community they had created. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Everett said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" "About legacy, about what we will leave behind when we are gone." Beatrice felt a chill at the mention of their mortality, even though she knew it was something they needed to think about. They were both healthy, but they were not young anymore. "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking that the ranch should be divided among the children in whatever way they think is fair. The money we have saved should go to help with the grandchildren's education. But more than any of that, I hope what we leave behind is the example of a life well lived, of choosing love over loneliness, of building something meaningful with someone you care about." "That is already your legacy," Beatrice said softly. "You taught our children what it means to love fully and work hard and build a good life. They are teaching their children the same things. That will continue long after we are gone." "I hope so. I want them to know how much their mother and I loved each other, how much we loved them, how grateful I am for every single day I have been given with you." They held each other close, two people who had found each other against the odds and built a life that exceeded any dreams either had dared to have. The years continued their steady march. There were losses, of course. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1905, and Beatrice mourned the loss of her friend and business partner. Friends and neighbors aged, and some moved away or died. But there were also continued joys. More grandchildren were born. The ranch continued to prosper. The community remained strong. On a warm September evening in 1908, 30 years after their wedding, Beatrice and Everett sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set behind the mountains as they had done countless times before. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray, their faces lined with the marks of a life fully lived. 30 years, Beatrice said, shaking her head in wonder. "It seems like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean. I can remember that first day I walked into the mercantile like it was yesterday. You were standing at the window, looking so lost and alone. I wanted so badly to be the one who changed that for you." "You did change it. You changed everything." "I was drowning in loneliness and did not even know it. Normal had become silence and solitude and just getting through each day. And then you made normal include company. You made normal mean love and connection and family and joy." Everett took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "You did the same for me. I was drifting through life, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me a home." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their daughter Margaret preparing dinner. She had moved back home temporarily to help care for them, though they insisted they did not need help yet. "Do you have any regrets?" Beatrice asked suddenly. Everett thought about it carefully before answering. "None. Not a single one. Everything I did, every choice I made led me to you and to this life. I would not change a moment of it." "Neither would I. Even the hard parts, the losses and struggles, they all made us who we are. They all brought us here." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Beatrice reflected on the long journey from loneliness to love. She thought about the woman she had been, isolated and resigned to a life of quiet desperation. She thought about the courage it had taken to open herself up to Everett's attention, to risk connection after years of protective isolation. And she thought about everything that had come after, all the love and life and family and joy. Loneliness was not normal, she had learned. Connection was normal. Love was normal. Building a life with someone who saw you and chose you every single day, that was normal. And she had been so very blessed to learn that lesson, to live that truth. The years that followed were gentle ones. Beatrice and Everett aged gracefully, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. They watched the new century unfold with interest and occasional bewilderment at how quickly the world was changing. Automobiles began to appear on the roads. Electricity came to Fort Garland. The old ways were slowly giving way to the new. But some things remained constant. Their love for each other never wavered. The ranch continued to operate, now primarily under Samuel's management, but still bearing the family name. The house they had built together stood strong, filled with memories and laughter and the echoes of a life well lived. In the spring of 1914, Everett fell ill with pneumonia. He fought it bravely, but his aged body could not fully recover. On a quiet morning in late April, with Beatrice holding his hand and their children gathered around, he passed away peacefully in the bed where he had slept for more than 3 decades. Beatrice was devastated by the loss, but she was not destroyed by it. She had 36 years of love and companionship to sustain her. She had children and grandchildren who surrounded her with affection and support, and she had the knowledge that she and Everett had built something lasting and real together. She lived for another 8 years, remaining active and engaged with her family and community. She took pleasure in her great-grandchildren, taught them to garden, told them stories about their grandfather in the early days of the ranch. She made sure they knew how much Everett had loved them all, even the ones born after he was gone. On a peaceful summer evening in 1922, Beatrice Jordan Grant passed away in her sleep at the age of 67. She was buried beside Everett on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the vast Colorado sky they had both loved so much. Her children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, sharing stories and memories. They talked about how she had transformed from a lonely, isolated woman into the vibrant center of a large and loving family. They talked about how she and Everett had shown them what real love looked like, what it meant to choose someone and keep choosing them every day. Samuel, now in his 40s, stood at his mother's graveside and spoke about her legacy. "My mother taught me that loneliness is not inevitable. She showed me that it takes courage to let people in, to risk connection, to choose love over isolation. She and my father built something beautiful together, and they made sure we all knew how to build our own beautiful things. That is what we carry forward. That is what we pass on to our children and grandchildren." As the family dispersed, returning to their homes and their lives, the ranch remained, a testament to what Beatrice and Everett had created together. The house stood strong. The land continued to produce. The creek still flowed along the southern edge of the property. And in the hearts of everyone who had known them, their love story continued to inspire and guide. Beatrice's loneliness had been so deep it had become normal, but a cowboy had seen her, truly seen her, and made normal include company. He had shown her what it meant to live fully, to love deeply, to build a life that mattered. Together they had created something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes, a legacy of love and family and connection that rippled outward through generations. The ranch continued to operate under Samuel's management and eventually passed to his children. The house was maintained lovingly, always remaining in the family. And on the hill overlooking the property, 2 graves side by side reminded everyone who saw them that love was the most important thing, that connection was worth the risk, and that the loneliness we think is normal can be transformed into something beautiful if we are brave enough to let someone in. Years later, when Samuel's granddaughter asked him about his grandparents, he told her the story of how they met, how Beatrice had been so alone she did not even recognize her loneliness anymore. How Everett had walked into her mercantile and seen past her careful walls. How they had chosen each other and built a life that blessed everyone around them. "What is the lesson?" the little girl asked. Samuel smiled, his eyes distant with memory. "The lesson is that we are meant for connection, that love is always worth the risk, that what seems normal and inevitable, like loneliness, can be changed if we have the courage to reach out and the wisdom to let others reach back. Your great-grandmother and great-grandfather understood that. They lived it every day, and because of them, none of us have to be lonely unless we choose to be." The little girl nodded seriously, storing away the story to tell her own children someday. And so the legacy continued, a love story that began in a small mercantile in Fort Garland, Colorado in 1878 and rippled forward through time, touching lives and reminding people of what was truly important. Loneliness did not have to be normal. Company, connection, and love, those were what normal should be. And one cowboy and one lonely woman had proven it was possible to transform your life, to move from isolation to joy if you were brave enough to try.